three images that I want to share with you. And what they all have in common is I found them to be very touching this week, very simple. Batya was my daughter, at a school in Tel Aviv yesterday, and they were explaining to the children in the elementary school, and she overheard one of the teachers talking with her class that today they were going to have in the school a drill if by chance a missile fell. And they would have a drill and they'd have to go to the shelter. And the teacher is being very calm, and that's important. And suddenly, it was either a grade 1 or a grade 2 little girl asked the teacher, what time exactly is this going to happen? And the teacher said, I don't know yet exactly, but it's going to be fine. You don't have to be worried. And she said, no, I'm worried because my cat at home gets very nervous when there are any type of strange noises, like fireworks, and if there'll be a siren. So the teacher said to her, no, there isn't going to be a siren. The principal will be making an announcement over the intercom. And the little girl persisted and said, yeah, but the cat might hear because our house is on this street. And the teacher reassured her that she would call her mother and tell her when she knew exactly when it would be. But I heard that, and the sensitivity of this little girl, very touching. Second, the other night, I think maybe stupidly, I stayed up till after 1 a.m. watching the goings on at the Knesset. And in the heated arguing, all of a sudden, a Knesset member walked in, and you could see that he still had a neck brace on. He had been in an accident, a very serious accident several months ago. And this was his first time entering the Knesset. And they're in the plenum. And as the different sides are arguing, the speaker says, wow. And he welcomes this member, Boaz. And it was dead silent, with all sides running toward him, wanting to welcome him. And that was alluded to. He was on one side, he was joining his party. But when he came in, everyone was happy and wishing him well. And the third, probably the most important, is some of you might be aware, but Israel has 2 new Olim as of this week. Max Starkman and his girlfriend, Noah Pollock. And Max is the grandson of Jerry and Millie Zikrona Livracha Lev. And they have just made Aliyah to the wonderful city of Tel Aviv. And that's very exciting and touching. And of course, we wish them much hatzlacha. Yeah. So we have been suggesting over the last number of weeks that the power switch from Haman to Mordechai is far from a twist of fate. And the next section of our narrative equally reflects intentional, well thought out planning on the new vizier's part, that is Mordechai. As we read, please look for at least 6 elements that are the essence of Mordechai's strategy in his battle to achieve victory in the political war he sets into motion. So let me share the screen. Okay. Six elements. His strategy as a politician now and a leader. So King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordechai, the Jew, "Behold, the house of Haman I have given to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he laid a hand on the Jews. And you write about the Jews as you see fit, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For a writ that is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be rescinded." Okay, now the power is with Mordecai and I would say Esther. And now look for those 6 elements. And the king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded, to the Jews and to the satraps, the provincial governors, and the governors and the princes of the provinces from Hodu to Cush, 127 provinces, every province according to its script, and every nationality according to its tongue, and to the Jews according to their script and according to their tongue. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's ring. And he sent letters by the couriers on horseback, the riders of the king's steeds, the camels bred of the dromedaries, that the king had given to the Jews who are in every city, the right to assemble and to protect themselves, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish the entire host of every people and province that oppress them, small children and women, and to take their spoils for plunder. Now, at this point, I need to point out what Mordecai has done here. He has taken the edict that Haman had written, and he is using that same edict, and that is why he has at the end of verse 11, and to take their spoils for plunder. And you'll see why I'm pointing that out a little later. You will note. Very firm and frightening language. In one day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the copy of the writ was that an edict be given in every province, published before all the peoples, and that the Jews be ready for that day to avenge themselves upon their enemies. And now he has written on his own. The couriers, those who ride the king's steeds, the camels, went out, hastened, and pressed by the king's order, and the edict was given in Shushan, the capital. And Mordecai left the king's presence with royal raiment, blue and white, and a huge golden crown, and a wrap of linen and purple, and the city of Shushan shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and joy and gladness and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's order and his edict reached, there was joy and gladness for the Jews, a banquet and a festive day, and many of the peoples of the land became Jews because the fear of the Jews was upon them. So, anybody want to share any elements of strategy that you found here?
Bracha,
Yes.
not particularly strategy, but from the beginning, when the statement says Ish Yehudi, we know right away that this is not just a regular man, but somebody who's very special.
Yes, yes, thank you. I also occurred to me that he wasn't saying it, Mordecai the Jew, as if Haman was calling him a Jew now, but right on, Esther. Anyone else? Well, I'll get us started. Was somebody?
It's almost as if by doing exactly what Haman was planning to do, he is indicating that he has taken that position that for so long all of these provinces had assumed for Haman, that this was very much a statement that this was the first person in command. But I'm struck by the fact that, like Amalek, the killing of the children, the women and the children, it was almost like making up for what wasn't done with Amalek when the children of Israel were commanded to kill all of that. I find that very interesting, actually. That because it's so hard for Jews to not show a kindness, and you think of the children, the women and the children as being innocent in war.
We're going to refer to that in a little while, the second Esther. That's a very important point that Hazony will address. It was King Saul who was commanded to wipe out the Amalekites, and he didn't. But of course, it's very related to this, and we will get to that. Thank you. So the first thing.
Excuse me, one other thing that struck me in this, when you see that all of these provinces now accepted the Jews as accepted their position of admiration, etc., it made me think of Acharit HaYamim, that I could imagine that at that time somebody might have considered Mordechai to be like a Mashiach. In terms of, although, I don't know in terms of the timing with Yechezkel, etc., with the various prophets, but really when you see that, it comes as a shock to me that all of the provinces would have so admired the Jews. You would think that it wouldn't be so homogeneous.
Well, does anybody want to respond to that comment by Esther right now?
I don't know if this is a response, but I could see it as being the start of anti-Semitism too, because they became Jews, or they were afraid of the Jews, or that's the way I see it too.
Which is very different what Frida's saying from what you said, Esther. You are being very utopian.
I'm saying just
being realistic, that we don't have reason to believe that it's because they are truly in admiration or in love with the Jews. But one of you used the word fear now, I think, Frida, and we discussed that last week. They see who's in power, who's the strong party now, and that's who you then follow for very un-Mashiach-site reasons. But let's look at these elements. We will return to this. So Mordecai, first of all, sends out a decree, letting it be known that he is the one commanding with the king's support, and therefore it alludes to in the psukim his ring, the king's horses, and then you look at verse 15 and 16, and you see Mordecai making public appearances. And then in 17, that there are public celebrations already. And his making those public appearances and him sending out this decree is so important because Mordecai knew that in order for him and the Jewish people in Persia to be victorious, he had to focus on the Jews' morale. Jews must believe they can win, and then they would be able to impress upon their enemies that they may lose. Mordecai understands strategy enough to know that his first concern has to be having the people with him and feeling strong. So that's the first thing. Anybody note anything else?
Bracha,
Okay. Go ahead, Marlene.
I jotted down a couple of things.
You know what, Marlene, as long as you're saying that, I think of this every now and then. Sometimes it might be good, dear students, dear classmates, to have a pen and a piece of paper next to you, because I like to sometimes do this. And I don't expect you to remember every word. Go ahead, Marlene. Thank you.
I started back in verse 9, and there was right from the start a recognition of the differences amongst the people. The letter was written in their languages, and all of those things that recognize the differences. And then I went on to verse, let me see where I am already, to verse 11, and there was an element of self-government being promised to these people, so that he was aware of the fact that they should be given the opportunity to govern themselves. When he came out in public, he actually dressed for the role. I mean,
Absolutely.
He came out and he was, nobody could have said he was the Mordecai that was sitting at the gate. He was the
Yeah.
Mordecai who was the right-hand man to the king. And
Absolutely.
then of course, he allowed for, this all happened very quickly. He got the message out to them, and then there was reason for a celebration. So that was more on his side than what he wanted from the Jewish people themselves.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And if we continue into a few psukim, as he continues on his plan in chapter 9, the next chapter, the Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hand on those who sought to harm them, and no one stood up before them, for their fear had fallen upon all the peoples. So what do we have in that pasuk? Again, similar to what Marlene mentioned, that the Jews have assembled, they're getting organized, whether it's mentally, physically, militarily, but they are organizing themselves. And in the next pasuk, and all the princes of the provinces and the satraps and the governors and those that conduct the king's affairs elevated the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. So what he succeeded in doing here is rallying up the support of the provincial and the local governors. And we can all picture governor political presidential campaigns that go as such. And in the last pasuk, for Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went forth throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. And so, building on what Marlene had focused upon earlier, that he makes his presence seen, and in a very dignified way. And here he is building up his own reputation. Now, what was Mordecai, just to say it again, determined to achieve? And we haven't actually said the two end goals that I think he has in mind. Would anybody like overall? Yes, he wanted to organize them, make them feel powerful so that they could now be in charge, unlike what was going to happen if Haman was not discovered. So what do you think in this war, and it is, that Mordecai is announcing, what is he looking to achieve? Very specifically. Anyone?
I would think actually that he would want the Jews to be able to practice Judaism, to identify as Jews and not be afraid the way conversos would go underground, etc. Be in fear of everyone. And there were so many provinces. I don't know how scattered the Jews were in all those provinces, but I find it interesting. If you look at the gematria of 127, it reduces to 10, which reduces to 1. All of these provinces are in unity in terms of now being afraid of the Jews, and the Jews don't have to worry about any of the provinces. That's what I found in terms of this unity before, the way Mordecai described it. So I would think that he would want the Jews to be able to openly practice as Jews, develop their Judaism, and not be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody
want to offer support for that answer or disagree?
Not a question of support or disagreeing, but another point of view.
Okay.
Mordecai, I think, politically is a genius, because it did the law that Ahasuerus gave. You can't nullify a decree, but what you can do is issue something new, and that's exactly what he did.
Exactly. Yes. And Ahasuerus had told him that because I had signed it, won't be able to rescind it, but you can resend. Anybody else? I'm being a little cautious, more cautious than our other Esther, who is thinking in very lofty ideas. Does everybody agree that that's what his mind is set on, in making sure now that the Jews will be able to live as Jews openly? Would that be the first thing? And from the language that is being used?
Well, I would also say, Bracha, that this would be encouragement for the future. This is a historical event now. It's being written down. That for Jews to have courage in the future when they deal with the anti-Semitism, to know that you can have success, to inspire them to be able to fight. If something comes up, take a look at this example, because this is now historically recorded. So this is like looking back at Torah, etc. We see all the foibles of all of our forefathers. They were regular people, but in every case we see that they have done good things, they have done bad things, and we can work from there in how we live our lives to sort of have courage to do the good things, forgive ourselves for the bad things, and go forward to continue to do good things.
Okay, I think definitely that is part of the reasoning behind the stories that we read in the Bible, that we look and see them as models. There is a question of whether we are supposed to use this as a paradigm for the future. Some feel yes, some feel not in exactly the way it happened, but we'll talk about that as well. Anybody else? Because no one has said, I'm saying this, but I'm saying this on behalf of our thinker, Yoram Hazony. He says, what are the two primary goals, at least to begin with, is, and I'm quoting him, to deal a death blow to anti-Semitic power in the empire, killing many and destroying the enemy's leadership. I'm going to repeat that. Deal a death blow to anti-Semitic power in the empire, killing many and destroying the enemy's leadership. And the second, to establish a deterrent against future threats to the Jewish communities of Persia. A deterrent. He also wanted to highlight, as we said just a few minutes ago, his new position with the king, who will now have in mind, he believes, the Jews' interest, but not necessarily for altruistic reasons. We understand that already. Anybody else or anybody want to comment?
Well,
to this?
I was just thinking about
Dan,
Mordecai,
yeah.
about in number 4 says Mordecai waxed greater and greater. So obviously he's got power now.
Yeah.
And he can utilize that power to keep guys like Ahasuerus in line. So it's in the best interests of these tyrants to listen to this guy, because he's going to bring a lot of problems upon their heads.
Okay. Yeah. I believe that is how he is seeing it. Anyone else?
Bracha, question, how long-lived was this? I mean, because it came to an end, and so how long did this?
Well, we know that actually future King Cyrus was actually pretty good to the Jews, even allowed them to go back, but many stayed. And then, as is always the case, it did not last for long enough. Now, if we look at the third pasuk here, and the second, it says, the fear had fallen upon all the peoples. And then in 3, for the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. So all of them are supposedly afraid. So let's revisit Mordecai's plan. Mordecai, now, because he is seen as powerful as he is, he has the option of restraining the fury of the promised Jewish onslaught. He's told them what's going to be. He sees the reaction. No one is going to stand up to him and the Jewish power. So why does he insist on war? And Hazony says the following. in politics, a minimalistic response to a real threat all but ensures two undesired consequences, both of them deadly. One, the defeated enemy nurtures the hope of revenge and continues to be an active threat as he seeks an opportunity to reassert his challenge. They might be afraid, but if you hesitate, they're going to grab on to what they see as an open window. Two, the mildness of the response encourages others to take advantage of what can be perceived to be hesitancy or weakness on the part of the ruler. The only hope to avoid future outrages is thus the assertion of overwhelming power in the first instance. And Hazony continues, if you read on, specifically in our story, saying Mordechai believes if he is to make the reversal of the Jews' fortune complete and stable, he has no choice but to make it perfectly obvious to Achashverosh that the Jews are strong, and it is a very real benefit, as Stan said, to him to ally himself with them and protect them. And so Hazony is suggesting that even if you see that the people are afraid of you, don't trust it. Because if you show the slightest, Hazony says, hesitancy, you're going to be in trouble. Things will change.
That reminds me of, well, after World War I, Germany got defeated and was a big part of the reason for Second World War.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, I was thinking also that right now the speed with which they're going through with stuff is much of the same thing, not trusting the other side. If you give an inch and waiting and show any sort of, I think that's the thinking. I'm not saying it should be good or bad, but it's to show that you're sort of invincible on this thing. You know, you've got to show your power. They've got this power. They grabbed it fast, and then they'll worry. Hopefully they'll worry about it later and work on things that work for the people. But I think you're seeing some of the same kind of psychology there.
That's an interesting comment, and it's been discussed. Yeah, we'll leave that.
There's
another
I think
point.
it is.
2 points.
another point,
Bracha.
Okay, wait, somebody, we're hearing two people.
Yeah, I was going to say there's another point. It
Yes,
sort of
Michael.
sounds, the way you were talking, as though the entire nation is afraid of us, and it was really we destroying everyone else. But when you read the Megillah, it makes it very clear that there was an actual attack on us still by our enemies. So there may have been a lot of people afraid of us, but there were still our enemies who weren't, and they were out to kill us. So I think the response is justified, where Mordechai knew these guys are out to kill us no matter what, and we not only defend ourselves, we've got to make a resounding victory.
Yes, okay, just to read you a few lines on that you don't have in front of you. because the language of killing is so strong, Hazony says, Mordechai reasons that the Jews need a shot of confidence and that the anti-Semites need a slap in the face to deprive them of their certainty of victory. And he goes on, and if the Jews must stay up nights wondering whether their children will be alive a year from now, whether someone else will be living in their home a year from now, the anti-Semites can afford to lose some sleep as well. Yeah. So Mordechai carries out this war. Now, let's read it, and then we'll have things to say. And the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword and with slaying and destruction, and they did to their enemies as they wished. And in Shushan, the capital, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. And Parshandanta and Dalphon and Aspata and Porata and Adalia, Aridata and Parmashta, the Arise and Aridai and Vaizata. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hamidata, the adversary of the Jews, they slew, but on the spoil, remember what I pointed out earlier, but on the spoil, they did not lay their hands. On that day, the number of those slain in Shushan, the capital, came before the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, in Shushan, the capital, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, and the 10 sons of Haman. In the rest of the king's provinces, what have they done? Now, what is your petition? And it shall be granted you. And what is your request? And it shall be done. Anybody see anything interesting there? Different from 2 or 3 other times that Esther and the king talk with each other? What does Achashverosh say to Esther here? A little different from the other times.
Less than before, because he offered her half the kingdom before.
And what is he offering now? Now, what is your petition? And it shall be granted you. He doesn't limit it to half the kingdom, which shows that certainly even Achashverosh realizes Esther is with Mordechai, and he is acting as if she's got more power than him. He's not limiting it to the times that he said, I will give you up to half the kingdom. Okay, now, Esther said, if please the king, let tomorrow too be granted to the Jews to do as today's decree, and let them hang Haman's 10 sons on the gallows. Now, just as an aside, why is there a need, if they've already been killed, why is there a need to hang Haman's sons on the gallows?
Is an example for the rest of the people.
Yeah, to show the Jews' effectiveness. Okay, now, the king ordered that it be done so, and a decree was given in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. Now the Jews who were in Shushan assembled on the 14th day of Adar as well, and they slew in Shushan 300 men, but upon the spoils they did not lay their hands. And the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled and protected themselves and had rest from their enemies and slew their foes, 75,000. But upon the spoil, they did not lay their hands. And on the 13th of the month of Adar, And they rested on the 14th thereof and made it a day of feasting and joy. Hazony looks at those words, feasting and joy, and asks, and this is the person who just told us why Mordecai was justified in wanting to have that death blow and to create the deterrent. And he asks, what rejoicing and holiday could there be in this? And what moral teaching could there be in this? And he seeks to find a reconciliation between the overt militarism of the book of Esther with what he calls a defensible morality. Hazony expects, as we said at the start of today, the modern reader to have a problem with this. And very often you see that people don't pay attention to this latter part of the Megillah. Why do you think this is the case? Or might I be as bold as to ask if anyone here was stopping him or herself from saying, how can this be? Anyone?
Can I say something?
Yes.
If you look at the last 3 verses, it ended with, and they did not take the spoil. And it's a moral thing. It's that it shows that the Jews were not after the riches of the people of the land. They just were just doing the right thing by defending themselves.
Okay. I was going to end with that in a little while, but it's terrific that you saw that.
Bracha, I'm reminded, Bracha,
Zipporah.
I'm reminded, it made me think back to when the Jews were leaving Egypt, when it was the opposite. They took the spoils with them when leaving Egypt.
And there are different theories about that,
Okay,
But
which we will get to talk about in a few weeks.
Yeah, but
okay.
Abraham did not want any of the spoils when he helped Sodom.
True.
No. Now, obviously, Haman wanted the spoils and wanted the monies to devote to his actions. But that is very observant in explaining that you're immediately seeing it. Was that Sandra who was speaking?
Claudette.
I'm sorry?
Claudette was that I saw. That.
Thank you.
And me too,
then-
when I said that Abraham did not take the spoils.
Yes, Esther. Yes.
Bracha,
Okay, go ahead, Marlene.
I have some difficulty with this because
See? Why did you take so long? I knew it.
because to me, I mean, it seems that it ends with no regret on the part of the Jews, whereas even when we do at our Pesach Seder, we empty parts of our wine cup because we regret the lives that were lost with the slaying of the firstborn. And this just seems to be, well, you know, we did this and we're going on our merry way.
Okay.
I think it's a difference between a just war. I think this was a just war because they were fighting for their lives. They did the moral right thing. They did not abuse their whole thing.
Yeah, as long as you're bringing up that point now, let me adapt. He considers it, Hazony, as a just war because they are defending themselves, and for the reasons that he said, that you can't trust that they won't come after you, and as Michael said, they were already, that you can't hesitate. However, if they would have been allowed to take the spoils, that would have undermined the justness of the war, because it would have been saying they're not really doing this to save Jews, but to steal. And Hazony talks about that in a way of saying that that's not what Haman was going to do. He was going to murder just for the sake of murdering. But here we are doing this to defend ourselves. And sometimes Hazony says that's what is necessary. And when it says that they were feasting and happy, rather than look at it that they are happy, because we're told that we never express joy over somebody else, even an enemy dying, but the joy is that we survived. Is that we survived. And do we not have a right for that? Now,
Bracha, there's one more point.
go ahead, Michael.
When the Jews killed, the story says they killed 300 or 500 men.
Yes.
Haman and the Persians were going to kill every man, woman, and child of us. That's something else. Like that, it was pure hatred that we had to defend ourselves against. And we only defended ourselves fighting the men. We didn't kill the women, didn't kill the children. It's a big difference.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Now, again, Hazony devotes some time in recognizing that there are Marlene Axsmiths and that have difficulty when they read these kinds of texts. And she's not alone in that. You know, the Jewish philosopher Yeshayahu Leibovich, better known as the brother of Nechama Leibovich, he was known to be pretty much anti-militarism. Well, legend has it that on Purim, he would not be in the city that was reading the Megillah. In other words, we read the Megillah throughout Israel. I don't remember, let's say it's Monday night. He would make sure that he's not there, but he's in Jerusalem. And then when it's Shushan Purim, which is when we read the Megillah in Yerushalayim, he would leave Jerusalem. And what was he doing? He was avoiding having to read the Megillah because he could not accept what he called a massacre. Now, Hazony explains that it's not that we're saying yay to war and that it's just a reality, but he's saying it is a reality. And he says, interestingly, that we live with two commanded and conflicted ideals. On the one hand, holy shall you be, and that's a sense of purity. separation from the needs and the urges of the body and of the world. And there's a time for that. On the other hand, maybe 6 days a week, justice, justice shall you pursue. And that he calls morality, involvement with the concerns of people and the world. And he says the following: the crux of the contradiction between the two ideals is man's relationship to power. Purity requires that man renounce power, but morally requires that man have power in order to pursue right. You want to be able to do certain things, so you need power and be in that position to do the right. This is true on the individual level, in which one can only give to others if one has what to give. But it is even more true when one considers moralities of scale, which require vast amounts of political power, economic power, military power. Without power, there is no police force capable of defending the innocent, no court capable of doing justice, no army capable of wresting peace from the aggressor, and no surplus capable of feeding and clothing the poor, nor of paying to teach truth to the young. Morality requires power, and morality on a vast scale requires power on a vast scale. Now, how do you reconcile this? What is the Jewish response to this conflict? And he says balance. And he gives two examples. We have 6 days a week that we live in the world and hopefully are moral, but being moral means that you're dealing with realities. And then on the other side, you have the Shabbat with a rest from that power struggle. And the second example he gives for balance, seeking worldly power through sexual relations and raising up heirs, yet maintaining purity through the institution of marriage and periods of monthly abstinence. Those are just a couple examples that he gives. Now, each side of the balance calls for a leader. And we need the guidance and the instruction of that leader who is the embodiment of that ideal. So what did our tradition do? It tended to divide between the political leader and the priest. Because each one, if they really were to be devoted to that ideal, couldn't be involved with the other. What's a perfect example? King David, who some of us have an issue with because he wasn't, but that's his personal life, and all politicians, well, I don't want to say all politicians, okay. King David was responsible for the moral achievement of uniting the fragmented Jewish tribes and leading successfully against our enemies. A moral achievement, and its necessity can't be exaggerated. Yet, King David was disqualified from what?
Building the
Building
temple.
the temple.
Building the temple.
Yeah.
Now, on the one hand, that doesn't seem fair. He was doing something for the good
But
of
the-
our people. But because of the blood on his hands, it's as if I see it that God is saying, I need you to do this. And it's as important as building of the temple, but it's got to be clear that we need the pure temple. Yeah.
But bringing it to today's politics, you don't have to like the politician. You want you vote for the politician that you think will do good for the country. You don't have to marry him.
No, that's what it does come down to. We would prefer, naively to think that this person has all the qualities, all the midot, the milas, that they're smart, they're a strategist, they're a leader, they're dynamic, they're wise, and they're
Moral.
ethical. And they're loyal to everyone. But you can't be loyal to everyone, can you? But that they have in mind the good of the people that they're leading. You want to believe that. But it's so hard sometimes. It's so hard sometimes. So Hazony realizes, again, that it's very difficult for some today to understand this. Now, what he also points out, you have to understand, when I said before that, is this a paradigm for today? In those days, this is what was going on. This kind of killing. And the Jews were a part of that. And that's what spoke to the people alive then. But when he says it comes down to what he said last week, strength, attracting strength, and not hesitating, and being very wary. Because here you have a situation where a king one day is saying to Haman, go ahead, kill them, annihilate them. And then the next day is putting that same ring on the Jew. As if it's just, okay, today I feel this way, today I feel that way.
But Bracha, don't we have to read the Torah as it is relevant to us today? Because many of the laws don't apply anymore.
Well, there are certain laws, but what would you mean specifically here?
Korbanot for one.
Oh, but no, yeah. But
Yeah.
that's not the issue.
But simply that you have to understand that the laws in the Torah, many of them apply to the way people behaved at the time. Like don't bow to an idol. Don't think many people bow to an idol today.
It depends on how you want to define idol.
Oh, okay.
But I think you go through the texts and you have a sense, just as slavery, that the rabbis took that out. We still read it, that section in Exodus about slaves.
But it's a moral lesson too.
But you read and you glean from that. But certain messages are eternal.
Yes.
And that is what we heard, that the Megillah is saying that it is for people to take responsibility, God is there, but he's taken a back seat here, and it's for people to take responsibility. And the overall, Hazony says, objective, if you're going to war, as strange as it might sound to a modern reader, if you're going to war, it's only not just for defense, but it's to make your part of the world and the entire world ultimately safe.
But
That's why you're doing it. And for any other reason, no, then it is murder.
But Torah also says God helps those who help themselves.
Yes. Yes. Okay, and here are the 3 psukim again of them not touching the spoils. Yeah. So this is not just a holiday of getting dressed up. It's got a lot to it. Very serious, very serious.
I think, Bracha, I think one of the important things it shows is the importance of having a strong leader. And if we'd only had a strong leader during the Holocaust, if we'd only had a strong leader like that during the last 2,000 years, and we need leadership. And Mordechai showed that. And I found it fascinating that in the beginning, when he first came, he was dressed in rags or whatever, but he still asserted his independence and showed a strong moral character. And then later, when he told Esther, you're going to have to do something because otherwise we're going to lose everything. And then it turned out that he, in fact, was a strong moral leader. He just hadn't been wearing all the fancy clothing to go with it. And he knew how to actually use strategy and see the whole situation, what had to be done. And he knew that he also had to show strength in saying, yeah, we're going to have to kill a few people because we don't want to show weakness and we want to make it safe for everyone in the end.
Yeah, thank you, Shirley Ann.
What I was struck by also, I don't know if I got it wrong, was that after Mordechai took power, that it said that all of the leaders of all the provinces accepted this, and yet after that, you had the people fighting with all the people. So in terms of, there was a strong leadership on Mordechai's side, one has to wonder about the leadership in the provinces.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's very scary thinking, and there they were not in their own land, but managed to assemble together and get their act together. Yeah.
On another note, Bracha.
Yes, Sarah.
Please tell us where the dressing up came from. Why do people dress up?
That's my next class. I paid Sarah to
introduce it.
So
by the way, Sarah, the dressing up is not a mitzvah. It's a tradition, a custom.
Right.
Okay. And that's
you're gonna tell us where it came from.
I will.
Okay.
I will.